A fairy's dedication to John Ashworth. Fairy is a derogatory slang for an effeminate man, but a fairy is actually a magical elf with insect wings. This whimsical little creature is always pictured in dainty pretty garb, hence the association with effeminacy. The equivalent slang for fairy in Singapore is a sissy or pondan in Malay. I created this male fairy to represent me. If I am called a fairy, I will just ignore the insult and rejoice over the idea that a fairy is an ageless, immortal being possessing magical healing powers. If you encounter a fairy, you will quickly realize that he is just an ordinary person, a human being with no magical powers. It can be your dad, your son, one of your friends, or the boy next door. And if you bump into an outrageous, witty fairy, be prepared to laugh your guts out. For the first 2 decades of my life in Singapore, I hid my sexuality to avoid being vilified. It was a shameful period, living a lie, fraught with fear of discovery and suffering in silence. To cut a long story short, after accepting my sexuality and leaving the Catholic Church, I met my first lover at 20. From a very young age, I was fascinated by travel to exotic lands. Therefore, it was inevitable for me to choose a profession that allowed me to see the world as well as lead some sort of gay life on board a ship. Away from home, I did not have to deal with family and society's disapproval or condemnation of my secret desires. To qualify as a Marine Radio officer, I had to take a course in life-saving. It was conducted conveniently across the road from the Polytechnic. I loved swimming, and I was very enthusiastic in learning how to save lives at the Seamen's Club. A glorious love affair. At the Seamen's Club, I noticed a European man sunbathing at the periphery of the pool. I was in a mischievous mood when I childishly decided to push him into the water. Shocked but not upset, the Englishman thought I was very cheeky and rebuked me while smiling. "Thank you very much. Now you have ruined my suntan." I giggled and apologized. The friendly European was handsome, tall and hairy. Wow! I was curious about his Yorkshire accent and asked him where he was from. Curiosity was followed by fascination as I inquired more about the stranger. I could hardly believe my ears when the Angmo Englishman invited me to have lunch with him. We walked to a new Nyonya restaurant called Kolek, and my adoration continued. After lunch, John wondered if I had seen the film Romeo and Juliet and asked me if I was free to see it the next day. In hindsight, I was not only accepting another treat, but a very romantic date. With mounting excitement, I agreed. In the 21st century, gays get hooked up on the internet without much fuss. I was seduced by John in a strange, funny way. In the dark cinema, I initially felt his elbow touching my elbow on my armrest. Then he squeezed the fingers of his other hand under his elbow, rubbing against mine, and furtively reached out to caress my elbow. I reciprocated excitedly with the fingers of my other hand, fondling and embracing his fingers. Nothing else happened in that seduction. At dawn the next day, I went to his rented room. The door was ajar, so I moved quietly to sit in front of the Englishman and slumber. A few moments later, Johnny woke up, surprised and overjoyed. Falling in love. That early morning, I fell in love with John when I was watching him sleep placidly in his tiny room. My heart was overwhelmed with happiness. It was a magical moment, deeply etched in my mind. Fortunately, I have a photograph of John snoozing next to a pole similar to that image. It continues to remind me of the moment I fell in love. I shared many exceptional, passionate feelings with an extraordinary man, and I was ecstatically happy to have finally found someone to love. Prior to that, I was a very lonely, confused soul, desperate for love. John was my angel, the father figure I had missed when my own father did not demonstrate any affection for me. Cane Hill, Queen Street, and Mandarin Ducks. My sailor boy rented a very cheap room in one of the huge colonial houses at Cane Hill. John's room was actually an outhouse with double storage rooms behind an outdoor kitchen. The door of John's small fridge was always open because of the heat in his tiny abode. Consequently, we frequently had to manually fan each other because it was unbearably hot, especially after sex. He sometimes borrowed an electric fan from the chap next door. Heaven! The main house was divided into numerous little rooms, all rented out to gay men. It was very convenient for those who frequented the only secret gay bar in town, called Le Bistrot, thereafter mincing back home to their gay refuge. Very early one morning, John woke me up to listen to the sound of a ship's horn in Singapore Harbour. I shall always treasure that extraordinary, magical call of the sea with my old sea salt. One day I took John to Queen Street. Next to a busy bus terminal was a row of shophouses where he selected specific designs and material for his shirts, trousers and shoes in a matter of hours. A week or two later, those handmade products were ready for collection. After Queen Street, we visited secluded places. At the quiet Labrador beach, we frolicked in the sea. Deep in the forest of a nature park, we picnicked and made love on a mat. I think it was about that time when John bought me a white gold neck chain. Unfortunately, it was stolen by a chambermaid when we stayed at the hotel. We were of course quite upset, so John bought me a similar one, plus a lovely pendant. I still have this sentimental ornament, featuring two Mandarin ducks, symbolizing eternal love. On board ships, sometimes John had to work overseas for 1 or 2 months. We both suffered unbearable heartache and dreadful loneliness. In private, I wept and longed for his touch. To compensate for that, John made sure I received a stream of letters, telegrams and phone calls, as well as spoken mail taped on cassettes from Chiba in Japan to Baltimore in the USA. I also received gifts of his pubic hair, erotic poems, etc. Once I had to wait by the phone whilst his ship was sailing past Singapore. At the appointed time, John spoke excitedly to an exalted Jimmy. On another occasion, he could not leave his ship, so I hired a bumboat to visit his tanker. After exploring his ship, he took me to one end of the vessel, far from the prying eyes of the crew, aptly nicknamed the Golden Horn, where we cuddled and kissed passionately. The Wild Goose Club. John and I cemented our special relationship with the formation of the Wild Goose Club, with 2 founding members only. This idea came about when John presented me a very funny book called Fruits of the Loom, about gay cowboys and American Indians. These dandy characters belong to a promiscuous Wild Goose Club. I designed and printed our club t-shirts, as well as one just for my sweetheart alone, reading, "Dirty old captains need love too." A couple of years later, my first and only boyfriend, Peter Planica, living in South Africa, had written to me about his desire to see me. I was very excited because he kindled my homosexuality when I was 16. I made various plans for John and I to entertain him. Suddenly, John burst into tears. He was afraid of losing me. His emotional outburst was obviously an expression of how deeply he was in love with me. Cameron Highlands, Penang, Langkawi, Bangkok and Chiang Mai. Before I met John, I had never been on vacation. I was exultant when he suggested that we go on holiday. I chose to visit Cameron Highlands, Penang and Langkawi. I saw strawberries growing in the cool mountain mists of the highlands. Further up north, the limestone-cast landscapes of Langkawi were stunning and beautiful. I was in paradise with the love of my life. John was always caring and considerate, charming and sometimes quite funny with his Yorkshire expressions. Most of John's friends will remember his prolific letter writing and his tie and knot carpet making. I designed 2 geysers with necks intertwined for our love nest in Changi. He also knitted a lovely jumper for me. Shortly after that, we rented an apartment at Gilstead Road. I had special permission to live out of National Service Camp, and John would drive me back to camp every morning. During our 2 years at Gilstead Mansions and Ham Court, we hosted many fabulous tea dances, often with drag shows. But the hottest event was a wild party at the Colonial Villa in Ferry Point, Changi. When John proposed to take me on our next vacation, I immediately suggested Bangkok and Chiang Mai because a few years earlier, at the Student Christian Movement Congress, members of a Thai delegation had invited me to visit their enchanting country. When our plane flew over the Gulf of Thailand, I looked down excitedly at beautiful islands in an emerald sea. I enjoyed the delicious spicy food and attractive temples. We went to my first gay bar, the Twilight. Absolutely mind-blowing. The 10-hour night bus journey to Chiang Mai was another first for me. One evening we visited a dimly lit restaurant with classical Thai dancing. As we started eating our dinner, I heard John screaming in pain. He had munched on hot chilies and his mouth was burning. Lots of beer helped a little, but in future I'm sure Johnny would be more careful with Thai food. On one bus excursion, I was so exhausted, I rested my head on John's shoulder. He did not mind the rest of the group tour passengers noticing, and I felt proud to be his lover. In 1975, I departed for Sheffield to study engineering, and I lived in his house for 2 years. John encouraged me to further my education and broaden my outlook on life. That year we made a grand tour of London, Paris, Brugge, Amsterdam, Lucerne, Innsbruck and many German cities. The following year we visited Rome, Florence, as well as other Italian cities. Epilogue. The last time I saw John briefly was in 2001 when I bumped into him at Singapore airport. We exchanged calling cards and I was advised to write only to his office address. He was very impressed by my second bonsai book. Early in our relationship, John asked me not to change because he declared that he'd sailed around the world and had never met anyone as perfect as you are. At that time, I knew that I was not perfect, and I believed that people change. I had, and so had he. On the other hand, I am grateful that his thriftiness had lasting influence on my entire life. He advised me not to live on credit and never buy anything I could not afford. I am very grateful for his kindness and generosity, but most of all, for sharing 6 years of his life with Happy, my nickname from the novel Fruits of the Loom. My 6-year love affair with John was not a long period compared to my 31-year relationship with my late husband Joseph. However, it was very intense. When John was sailing around the world, he spoke to me every day and sometimes more than once a day on cassette tapes. I would receive cassettes at regular intervals, posted from various parts of the world by my lovesick sailor. In affectionate relationships based on trust and respect, there is an absence of jealousy, suspicion, and domination. Alas, when one partner is irrationally insecure over the other's fidelity, the relationship is often marred by emotional blackmail and abuse. To avoid ugly arguments, John told me that he was afraid to meet any of his former lovers. His mail was scrutinized and phone calls listened to. John was denied his basic human rights to freedom of association. I had moved on almost half a century ago, lived in Europe for donkey years, yet I was not allowed to visit him in hospital when I was by chance in Singapore. My compassion was compelling me to visit a dying man who was 5 decades ago my passionate lover. Last year, when I was informed that John Ashworth had passed on, I did not cry. Even though I wept for Amir, who died of a stroke, and for another friend, Manix Kappers, a famous Dutch actor, because he committed suicide. I am sentimental, and I will treasure all the wonderful, exciting, and affectionate memories I had shared with John. He was my first lover, and we were passionately in love. My way of mourning his passing is this video, celebrating our very special experiences together. I met him in 1971 and we visited Thailand in 1972, exactly 50 years ago. My next video will feature 2 Bangkok temples which John and I had visited. Love is a Many Splendid Thing is a novel written by Han Soo-yin. It was made into a film starring William Holden. The theme song was sung by Matt Monro. John wanted me to read this book because it was a true love affair about a Chinese Han Soo-yin herself and a Caucasian and American journalist. He died in Korea, but she relished her precious memories of her greatest love. John wrote on the inside cover of the book, "Our love is a many splendid thing." I'm still deeply touched that he had defined our relationship in that splendid way. In Singapore, John brought me to see my first gay play called The Killing of Sister George. In London, we saw a young and very handsome Ian McCallum, now an Asian gay activist, standing on a stage with Tom Bell, acting out their mental, they were actually in adjacent jail cells, sexual intercourse, and coming. It was the most powerful acting imaginable. I persuaded him to see my idol, Rock Hudson, in a musical called I Do, I Do, I Do, with regret because the famous actor could hardly sing and dance. John Malcolm Ashworth was born in Sheffield on 26th of May 1932. I met his only sibling, Margaret, in Sheffield. We also went to Bexhill-on-Sea to meet his Aunt Carrie, who brought him up. This picture with his mum may be the only photo of little Johnny, aged 2. On the back of this photo, John wrote, July 1934. In the early 1970s, there was no internet gay porno to watch. But in the USA, John was able to buy Playgirl magazines for me, and my gay friends enjoyed staring at all those gorgeous naked men. Yet, my most treasured possession was, and still is, a vintage picture of John in G-string. In loving memory of Captain John Ashworth.